So they're like an adjudicative body. They're not a legal body per se, but they will hear a complaint from a group or an individual. They will have findings, and the state's party will be given a letter saying you really messed up here and you need to fix it, or blah, 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 whatever. They also, the committee members can also decide, we have a problem in the United States. Let's pretend we ratified it. We're going to go in there and take a look at this issue and issue some kind of findings and recommendations for improvement. Now, this has been used in other human rights treaties. What students will always say to me when we start talking about this is, what good is it? What are you going to do to a state's party that is really messed up? There's really a violation going on in the human rights treaty. You tell them they've messed up and they have to improve, and they don't do anything. I mean, that is one of the problems with these optional protocols. There is not a lot of enforcement power. However, it is an avenue for complaint. And if there is no avenue in your national legislation to make a complaint, I think it's a very valuable option for individuals. Okay. Does it or will it make a difference? These are not questions that I want to answer, but maybe in some of the groups, or maybe they're just food for thought for a later time. The pros and cons of a separate human rights treaty. And this isn't often talked about, but I think it's a fair thing to ask. Why do we have a special human rights treaty for people with disabilities? Does that not yet segregate, separate, put them aside as though somehow they don't belong with the rest of us? I think it's a fair question to ask. What does this convention do that the standard rules don't? That's an easier question to answer in a way, because there is no enforcement mechanism per se in the standard rules. Will it make disabled people more visible? It's one of the goals of the committee working to pass the convention was how to ensure that individuals with disabilities are included, they truly are visible. And visible to me means power, access to power. Individual power, political power, whatever. And I think that's a really good question to sort of watch as you do work in the field. Is it really working? The optional protocol, we've talked about that. Will development efforts integrate disability-related goals and include input from disabled people? It is clearly the goal of the convention that this happen. And again, I think it's going to be interesting to see if it actually plays out that way. And then international cooperation mandate. That's very clear in the convention. That has to happen. And a lot of the language, didn't have it up there, but a lot of the language in the committee discussions, and even within the sort of soft law, the guidelines that are coming out now about implementation of convention from the UN bodies are saying, it's a duty of more developed countries to provide that expertise, to offer that expertise, to share that expertise to those who don't have it. So I think there's some real pitfalls. Again, that's been talked about in here, some of the concerns and pitfalls in doing that. We'll talk about that in a second. So these next couple of slides are based really on how I've seen implementation of the CRC, the Children's Rights Convention, which my work's been primarily in Cambodia. In the short term, even though it may not change the lives of individual children immediately, in this case for individuals with disabilities, I think it does drive funding. And you all, I think, are going to see that a lot more even in this convention than I saw it in the CRC, because it's very much being incorporated in the Millennium Goals, even USAID, as Becky mentioned, that disability issues, incorporating disability concerns. World Bank has been doing this. It's going to go into all the mainstream funding streams. Children it hasn't been that seamless for children. States parties are obligated to report to the UN committee, and they are obligated to respond to the findings. Now, there's not going to be a blockade raised if they don't. There's always that problem of actual enforcement power. But if they ratify this convention, they have an obligation within 2 years, I believe, of ratification to do their first country report. They're all online. It's a fascinating place to get documentation. And if all a country does is that first country report, there's a baseline. You've got a baseline of information because they are obligated to go out and, really, how many people do we have with disabilities? And what kinds of disabilities? And where are they? And process for a state party who's never really done sort of a baseline snapshot of a particular group in their country. NGOs or a conglomerate of NGOs, as we did in Cambodia, 30 different NGOs working on children's rights got together and wrote what's called, we call a shadow report. I think it's called civil society. I don't know. There are different names for it, but it's a report that's issued from outside the government to answer the same questions that the government does, to do the same kind of review of the status of implementation of the convention rights, but it comes from outside the government. And those two reports are then the focus of a hearing at the UN, some Geneva, New York, some they're all different places, and the states party's government representative has to answer to the questions asked by the committee. I think it's a very powerful tool. It both forces government to take a look, it allows non-government entities to have a say at the UN body, and then the UN recommends changes and steps that should be taken, things that should happen. And 3 or 4 years go by and the states party has to respond to how they've done. So I don't know that we can call it evidence-based research per se, but it's data collection. And I have watched in Cambodia, there have only been 2 country reports for Cambodia. It's a little slow on the uptake doing their reports, but the data is so much better now because there was attention paid. How are we going to do this for our next report? Because we just don't have it. How are we going to develop it? What systems do we need to put in place? I think it's going to make a huge change. In the midterm national legislation, most states parties have to write national legislation to sort of implement the convention standards. That can be incredibly powerful as people become aware of it, and that's not everybody that becomes aware of it overnight for sure. It's one of those, I think, strategies to increase awareness. Individual complaint resolution, either within a national legal system and or at the UN. Over the long term, education of society, I think it's a hugely important awareness raising, whatever you want to call it. My first experience in Southeast Asia was in '88, and I was asking questions of Cambodians living in refugee camps. They weren't refugee camps at that time, they were displaced persons camps. Asking them about children with mental retardation. And it was discussed this morning that there isn't precise terminology in Khmer. That's true. Mental retardation, the term used was the same for anyone who couldn't speak, anyone who seemed delusional, anyone who had a stroke. I mean, it was a very broad term. But asking people about that is a qualitative research project, and at one point, a question I asked had to do with children with mental retardation. That's a population I was looking at the time. What about them in school? What do you think? Let's talk about it. And nobody answered it. I had N of 180. It was huge, N, relatively huge for me. And nobody answered that question. And when I sent translators back to sort of figure out what was wrong with this question, everybody had basically the same answer to me, which was, go away, come back next year, we have to think about it. It wasn't they don't deserve to go to school, they can't go to school, karma means they're not going to. It was like, we've never thought about this. We have to wrap our minds around this. And that's why I think this educational piece isn't quick. But I think it's incredibly important. And again, that's been talked about a little bit this morning of, as individuals see as individuals see disabled individuals using technology, it is going to help change attitudes. I think that's one way that we can change attitudes. And then just a final comment about the systems change. I think it's incredibly long-term commitment to changing systems, not just improving individual lives, which I'm not saying one at the expense of the other, but to change systems. So they don't have special schools for kids with disabilities or special classrooms. We have an educational system that can include all sorts of diversity and all sorts of differences. I think I'm over, so I'm going to let you contemplate the elephants in the room, which are very much real in our own country and our own disability rights law, and I think are really important internationally too. Lastly, this is my list of dangers in implementation because I see this play out in Cambodia. The paternal